so I know we have lots of ideas today, but before we start, let's just kind of compile all of that in a quick little 3-minute quick rave. So let's jot everything down we're thinking.
Time. Who wants to start?
Well, I have a lot of different things written down. One of the things that I wrote a lot about was the different perspectives that different characters have on Joseph. I don't know if you feel like that's something that we could spend our time talking about today.
I wrote about that as well.
I think so, me too,
Okay.
yeah. So one of the things I noticed is that on page 53, actually, there are the kids on the bus talking about Joseph, and they call him a psycho at one point. I think it's around here. So yeah, page 52 actually. Everyone knows he's psycho. He probably dragged you into the river, right? After the point there. So that kind of shows that the kids at school just kind of knowing Joseph's backstory, not knowing anything more about him, that's the impression they get. And they're trying to drive Jack away from being friends with him because of that perspective they kind of have on him. And some of the teachers even think that too, that don't tend to look underneath that.
Which goes exactly with what I jotted down, which is on page 22. In talking about perspectives, not only are the kids not giving Joseph a chance and kind of trying to get Jack away from him, but also the teachers are and the principal, Mr. Canton. So the line that I kind of focused on page 22 was Jack saying, "He's not like that, I whispered." So Jack seems to be the only person who isn't making these quick assumptions about Joseph.
And, yeah.
It makes me wonder, like, did the kids create their own assumptions of Joseph, or did the adults, the teachers in the building, have an impact on why they felt that way? Because they didn't really know much about him other than rumors, and where did they hear those from? Maybe those teachers? I don't know, it was interesting to me.
And it's interesting because the kids are making it like, they're saying, you know, oh, he's psycho, don't hang out with him, he's crazy. And the teachers are saying more or less the same thing, but they're framing it like, we're concerned for you, Jack. We don't want you to get pulled down. But in the end, it kind of feels like the same thing, that based on these same rumors or same half-truths.
It kind of seems like, really starting from the beginning of the book on page 2, Jack's parents really kind of, I think without meaning to, create kind of that reputation for Joseph by telling Jack everything that had happened. Like, after she found him, he screamed. She said he'd better come out of that stall right now. He screamed again. Then he tried to kill her. Just like, they're telling him the honest truth about what happened, but it kind of almost pumps up that reputation for Joseph before he even comes.
Right, and even as for us as readers too, because I think in the beginning, since like you said, this is literally on page 2, we don't even really know who Joseph is yet, other than this impression. So it's interesting that along with Jack throughout the story, we kind of get to know Joseph behind the image that he's kind of trapped in as well. So I wonder why the author kind of chose to have Jack be the narrator and for it to start that way.
The interesting part is, even though Jack is getting the full story, he's the only person in the entire book who doesn't use that against Joseph.
That is true. Yeah.
Right.
Everyone else doesn't know that story and just makes all of these assumptions, and Jack is the only one who doesn't.
And you know what's interesting too? The fact that they do live on a farm, that's the major setting in this. But the cow Rosie, obviously, obviously cows can't really know much about people's reputations or what others are saying about them. But Rosie from the get-go really does love Joseph and has this connection. So despite all the negativity going around with Joseph, you can kind of see that through this, he is a loving person. The fact that this animal who sees what's inside, doesn't really judge, can
I had seen that same thing on page 30. There was a specific few lines that I read to think about that. It said in the middle of the page, the cows looked over and their eyes got big and their tails swished and they started to hold their heads up and moo, which means they're pretty upset. Cows don't like strangers near the tie-up. They especially don't like strangers near the tie-up when they're about to be milked, unless they're the right kinds of strangers, like Joseph was. So I thought that was like a really cool line to think about. Joseph has this connection to the cow in some way, shape, or form, and made me think about why that is.
And I think it also goes along with, getting a little bit away from the cow, but sticking with the barn, I wrote down the significance of the setting here, that all of these deep conversations and this change in relationship between Jack and Joseph happened with the cows in the barn. And what is the significance of this barn? Why does Joseph feel like he can be himself when he's the city kid in a barn?
To piggyback off of that, kind of going back to the cows, but maybe not really.
We'll always go back to
on page 7, towards the bottom, when Jack's father is talking to Joseph about why he needs to do the work in the barn, specifically with Rosie. You need milk this bad. There's probably a store where you can get some like normal people, he said. It was the longest string of words he'd said. I don't need the milk, said my father. He pointed at Rosie, but she needs you to milk her. She doesn't need me to. She needs you. So I just think it's interesting, the repetition of the word need for a person like Joseph. I don't know if he's been told that people need him or that he's like valuable in that way, but I think that was really an interesting idea to go along with what you had brought up.
Yeah, especially with a kid who, knowing the little that we do about his family background, his mom's not really in the picture and his dad is not a great person, to be told that you're needed, especially when your daughter's been taken away from you, that's huge.
Has a purpose.
He has a
or
purpose
reason
now.
for being.
I like
Yeah.
that.
It also makes me wonder too, like if he can't be there for his daughter, maybe he's putting that, he wants to feel needed by his daughter, but he can't right now, so maybe he's using Rosie as kind of like a placeholder for the daughter in a way.
Stand-in,
Yeah. That makes sense.
Emotional placeholder. That's interesting. So one of the other things that I kind of wanted to talk about, so throughout the story, Joseph's reading this book, Octavian Nothing. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? So like if we turn
saw that.
to,
I saw that, Emily.
let me find what page was it. I had it marked.
60, I think.
Oh, thank you. Yep. Oh yes, page 60. So they're talking about the book, The Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing. So do you guys know much about that story? It's like a real book. That may be something, you know what, I'm going to jot that down. And I think after our conversation, I'm going to look up what that is, if it is a real book, because I always wonder, authors put things in the story for a reason. So it could have been any other book. It could have been like Little Women or something. So I don't know why it's The Astonishing Life
Yes,
of
Joseph would
Octavian Nothing.
absolutely read Little Women.
You're right, he definitely would. But my point is, why would he be reading this book?
Well, it's
you know?
interesting, it's got the person's last name is Octavian Nothing.
Yeah.
And Joseph is feeling kind of similar to that, so it's an interesting connection.
Right, because if he's not feeling that purpose, like we were talking about with Rosie, if he doesn't feel in his life that he's valued, then maybe he does feel like an Octavian Nothing.
On page 168, if we're talking books, Joseph is reading Walden and speaking with the language arts teacher about Thoreau. So it's interesting that we have this astonishing life of Octavian Nothing in the beginning of the book, and then we get to the end of the book and he's reading Walden. So I don't know if there's significance to that as well.
The interesting thing about Walden, too, is you think of Thoreau and how he's on his own and he's feeling very independent, but it's not like a lost feeling of being independent. It's like this confidence to it. So maybe that's kind of symbolizing something with Joseph. I don't know. Maybe it's kind of
And then when he first saw Octavian Nothing was way back at the beginning on like page 13, because Jack was reading it.
Right.
And he said, I said, it's supposed to be hard, and he shrugged and stuck it in his backpack. So it seemed like Jack picked it or got it picked because it was like a challenging book or a hard book.
Yeah.
And then we know that Joseph is like, he's in 8th grade age, but he's taking some of the 6th grade classes, and he's like had all these years when he hasn't been in school. So it feels like, and then to read Walden, which is like really hard, it feels like there's also that like change in Joseph.
I kind of made an assumption that maybe Joseph was smarter than he was letting on. Like, although maybe he was thought to be less, 6th grade reading level, I don't know. He might be hiding that. Maybe he wants attention in some way.
If I were him, I would maybe want attention, positive attention, especially from adults, to considering the history he's had, So that might make sense.
But he doesn't trust adults, so why
Oh, that
would
is
he
true,
want
too.
positive
That's
attention
true.
from them?
It is kind of that weird kind of juxtaposition. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I think the impression, at least in the beginning of the book that I got, is that he is just content to hate everyone and to keep his distance. He doesn't want this foster family to be anything more than a foster family. He wants his teachers to leave him alone. That obviously ends up changing, but I don't know that he cares about any sort of attention in the beginning.
No, I think they eventually, that grows. Maybe he starts to care more.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of reminds me of what Christina had mentioned about the cows, how they don't like strangers unless you're the right kind of stranger.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it kind of reminds me a little bit of how Joseph is. It's not any adult has to be the right adult.
Did
Yeah.
Mrs. Holloway and him get along? I'm trying to remember. If I'm thinking about, there were a lot of teachers who didn't like him right
I feel
off
like
the bat.
she
and
was
there
one of those.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yes.
she was one of those.
She was the
great
language arts
people.
teachers, right?
Yes.
Right.
And it says, you know how teachers are. If they get you to take out a book they love too, they're yours for life. So she grew to like him.
Yes.
And when
She's
he
one
was
of those
suspended,
people.
she was one of the ones that came over.
It was
Yep.
her and
Yes.
the math teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the gym teacher.
And the gym teacher.
Yeah, and it also says on 168, the same page, regarding Walden and Mrs. Holloway, it's towards the middle of the page. And Mrs. Holloway in language arts was calling on him a lot, I think because she saw Joseph reading Walden, which was a book that she had also enjoyed, like was mentioned before, so.
Definitely interesting.
This is making me think a little bit like what you were saying, Emma, about right at the beginning when you said, Jack's the only one who since Jack is the only one who really sees Joseph for who he is, despite all this negative rumors and, well, not rumors, true things about him. But you were saying, why are we then getting it from his perspective? Why is that and it feels like a lot of the other characters are growing just as much as Joseph, and they're growing in their ability to see through the bad outside into the inside, and it feels like as readers we maybe have to a little bit too, because we get page 2, we get this rundown of all these bad things he did, where we might also judge him as a bad kid, and we have to see kind of the way we have to try to be more like Jack and less like the other kids.
Which might be a lesson that the author wants you to take from this.
Right.
Be a Jack.
That's so true though, because I know a lot of people who started out this book, and in the beginning, first couple pages, they tend to think, wow, this kid Joseph, what is this going to be about? And they do kind of have that negative impression about him before they kind of get taken on this journey sort of with Jack.
But I think the author does that purposefully. I think he wants you to start off with this preconception so that you're shocked when you realize that what you thought was completely and utterly wrong.
It's more impactful though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of, this might sound slightly off topic, but it's not. It kind of makes me wonder about the reason why Gary Schmidt presented the story the way that he did.
Yeah.
Specifically, why would he choose to write the story from Jack's perspective rather than Joseph's? Because Jack is what? Jack is in 6th grade?
6th grade,
Yeah.
Joseph is 8th grade age, so there's a lot of kind of developmental stuff that happens between there. We learn a lot, we grow a lot.
With Joseph especially.
Yeah, so,
Right.
but we're hearing
Yeah, kid.
A lot happens in between those years.
But we're hearing the story from someone who's slightly naive and doesn't really know how the whole event felt. So I'm kind of wondering and putting it out there, why do you think the author did that? I'm still not sure.
Well, the younger you are, the more trusting you are. So maybe
Yeah.
the author did that to help us to see Joseph in a different light. Whereas if we had it from the perspective of somebody older, maybe they would have been much more judgmental. He was the one person really rooting for him in the beginning.
And I think Jack is the only person that Joseph feels comfortable with, so seeing it from Jack's perspective is really cool, because Joseph gives Jack details that I don't think he would have given other people. Right in the beginning, I just passed it. It was on page, now I'm not going to be able to find it, but they were walking and he asked, what Joseph's daughter's name was, and Joseph says, well, it's none of your business. And he says, oh, I was just wondering, and he goes, well, it's Jupiter, it was our favorite planet. So he wouldn't have, I think, said that to someone who wasn't, he wasn't a threat. Oh, it's on page 23.
If you think of the other kids that are around them too, it's special that it's Jack. There are a lot of other kids that he could have, connected with. It's not just because he's a naive kid, it's because specifically he's Jack,
And if it wasn't written from Jack's perspective, I don't think we'd hear a lot about Jack or of Jack, because he is pretty quiet and he's a minor voice in a way.
He's kind of a spectator in a way too, which is interesting because a lot of the action is happening with Joseph.
So it would almost be a whole different story it wasn't told from Jack's perspective, we wouldn't even care about Jack.
No,
Right.
not
Probably.
really.
Although if it was told from Joseph's perspective, we might see a different side of Jack. Like, would he be thinking, this nice kid I live with, or this annoying kid I live with, or this like naive
Nosy
kid or
kid.
nosy
He
kid?
wants to know everything about me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about that kind of stuff.
I also wonder if we would know. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wonder if we would know as much about Madeline as we're
thinking.
told.
Oh.
Like, because even on that same page that you mentioned, our favorite, you mean yours, and he nodded up the road again. So I'm wondering if we were inside Joseph's head, if we would get that constant conversation about Madeline, or if we would get nothing at all. So,
How is he handling it on the inside? This
Yeah.
whole situation. That is really interesting to think about.
Right.
What goes on in his head?
We don't meet Madeline. We
Mhm.
hear about her. That's
Yeah.
what I was
Never-
intrigued about. If we had met her, how would that change
Right.
this?
Right.
If it were told from Madeline's perspective, that short chapter where it talks about their relationship and how it all came to be.
Chapter 4.
Yes.
Mhm. Page
So chapter
69,
4.
yep.
Okay.
Which is like, got a lot to it, like classism and.
Oh my gosh, because Madeline, again, it talks about that she's showing Joseph, they're going on tennis lessons on a clay court, and then talks about Joseph going to the library computers to write to her.
She has a
and
nanny.
She has
She's
a nanny that
There's a
doesn't
guest
like
house.
him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, he's the plumber's boy too on page 71. So that's the other thing too. There's already, before Joseph does anything at all, this negative perception on him because of class, which is just, if you think about it, Joseph as a kid is a really smart kid. He like does, you know, he reads a lot of really interesting books, and he does show on the inside he's very loving. I wonder how much he really was affected by his father, the class that he was put in, this situation with Madeline. How could his life been different? It's interesting to me.
This is interesting. I'm just going back and kind of rereading on page 71. The nanny looked at him and said, "Go away before you get yourself in a lot of trouble you don't want," when he was going to talk with Madeline. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's interesting.
Kind of
Like
mysterious.
foreshadowing something bad's going to happen.
Right.
here.
Yeah. Huh.
Even the nanny knew. Maybe Madeline isn't that great of a kid. I don't know.
We don't know
Oh,
Madeline's
we don't-
story.
She's running around with a boy who's well beneath her.
It's really interesting how
Interesting.
before we even get to know these characters, we're hearing about their reputations first from other people. Like, we don't really know much about Madeline aside from what the nanny has now said. We didn't know anything about Joseph before what the parents had said about him. So it's like everyone's reputation is preceding them, and then it turns out that most of the reputations are wrong.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's just interesting.
So I'm just
we're
looking at our time.
yeah.
I was gonna say
Oh,
maybe we
okay,
want to
yeah.
Should we make a list of all the things that we have left to talk about that we could maybe come back
Yeah.
to?
Yeah.
And I have some
We
new
have
things
great
that I thought of now. I
See,
don't
Like our
remember.
next
Yeah.
steps for discussion, or
Yeah.
like the things we want to talk about next. What are some things that we wrote down that maybe we didn't get to?
Well, one of the things is just the significance of the name Joseph in general, especially when you get to the chapter when they talk about their Christmas together and the story about the angels. And there were a lot of parallels, interestingly, with Joseph and Madeline's story, and I think it might be interesting to analyze.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to also talk about the name Jupiter.
Yes.
As a,
So like
That's an interesting
names
name.
in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just what's it?
And maybe that drowning scene.
Ooh,
Almost
yes.
near drowning.
Near drowning.
Right.
And when all of her group members finish the book, I would love to talk
I
about
wrote
the
that
ending.
down.
Yeah.
I don't think we're talking about the ending too.
It's
Okay.
so hard not to.
So when we meet next time, these are kind of the things we might
Yeah.
start off talking about.
Yeah. All right. Great job, guys.